1, 2, 3. And it's the 9th of June and it's the cruise. It's our 11th episode. We got the 10th one behind us. It was a lot of effort. You have it now. You can look at it. It's a long story. We're not going to talk about that. We're going to go into our 11th episode of the cruise. And I'm going to let you hear from Mr. Jim Grant what it's all about.
Here's what we've got coming up on today's show, recorded on, this is the 9th of June. We're going to be looking at don't sing or shout when you're around friends and family, warn scientists. We're going to be looking at wear a mask on public transport here in the UK. We're going to be looking at the US formally requesting that Prince Andrew comes and talks about his old buddy, Jeffrey Epstein. We're going to be looking at how Britain, what it really needs after lockdown and economic collapse is a new royal yacht. That's what they're going to be looking at. Professor Ferguson, how wrong some people think he was. Boris Johnson doing a U-turn on the chlorinated chicken. Trump may have had a point about the UV light all along, and the risks of the track and trace surveillance system. So welcome, Mr. Campbell, Cruise episode 11.
It's in plain view, Jim. It's such a mess. As you were saying that, there was nothing that made me dissuaded in any way from the concept of in plain view or hiding in plain view. And I'm trying to remember when we did which episode it was where we did the basketball gorilla psychological test. Do you remember that one? Early days. You remember that? I thought we talked about that, didn't we? But just that concept of hiding in plain view, and like what, you mentioned that £100 million yacht, and I just right away, I thought, I've seen that all week, but is it parody? I didn't even read it, Jim, because I was just like, I don't want to know what kind of madness these pricks are up to next. Like, it seems like a rabbit hole that's just like, I can't even tell if they're joking anymore, right? Like, it's just beyond belief each time. So, you've got so much time to invest this, that, the other thing, regardless. But it started to make me remember this time that I went for a little go-kart. This is back in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, where I'm from. And near the airport, they had this just wild go-kart setup, go-kart track, and pretty high end, like one of those ones, Jim, I'm sure you've been on like a dozen, or if you haven't been on a go-kart, you probably can understand the concept of where even you get it on bumper cars. The same phenomenon will happen with like, I'm trying to think of other like things where you underestimate, right? Like a roller coaster is a perfect example of it. People are just like, hey, these things are, holy shit, like I gotta fucking die. They just like they go from like totally not realizing the kind of allowance that the government lets the public interact with machinery wise. And this is like, we go to this go-kart track, and you don't think, you don't give much of a concession to what kind of equipment you're going to be on, but fuck, the first time you get into it's like, holy shit, like you just realize, holy living fuck, is this thing able to go, right? And they gave us like a real talking to, Jim, like you'd expect, like, whatever we were at the time, just over 18, 19, 20-year-old Canadian yahoos on the edge of town, on the outside edge of town, beyond the fucking airport. They're just like, here's the rules, kids. Like, you can't have contact with the other carts, and, don't come up behind people fast, whatever. Try not to kill anybody. Get out there, So they gave us like the talking to, but regardless of what any of the other rules might have been, you noticed, Jim, that I placed in the rule that's imperative. You're not supposed to hit other carts, for sure, right? Like that's one of their big ones for sure. And they were really low slung, like you're like in a like almost a hammock, like real like laid back thing, and quite low to the ground. So really, really like really corner stable. Really, really hard to like feel any G forces with them because they were so low to the ground, so heavy, and your ass was like just clipping the ground as well, right? Like real low center of gravity. But somehow, Jim, I don't know if it was the third or the fourth or the fifth fucking lap, but somehow I found a way in undertaking one of my buddies to I clipped him with some force to the outside of the turn, and I fucking rolled it, Jim. I fucking rolled a go-kart, and it was weird as fuck because you're like, it's rolling, but your body's not rolling with it. Like you're able to kind of get caught up in the hammock that you're hanging in. And so I ended up like on the ground with it pinned on top of me, but it didn't continue to roll. It just had me pinned. And I remember like fucking having to really work to right myself to fucking pick it out. And I don't recall if it was still like suffering running when I turned it over or if I had to restart it. But regardless like of what happened in the transpiring between me like writing myself and thinking, geez, fuck, how am I gonna get the fuck out of here, and turning over the cart, regardless of what transpired in that 2 or 3 seconds, Jim, the engine was like askew, like from right to like kind of quite intently off center, and though it was able to run, it was just like like it was quite fucked, right? So I of course do, what are you going to do in that situation? You're going to try and sneak it into the pits and not tell anybody, right? That's the main thing, dude. This is long. I know your eyes there, Jim, are just going, what about CCTV television? It's fucking the prairies and the fucking like 80s, man. There's nothing like that going on. There's like just dogs and wolves and like coyotes, just like there ain't no cameras anywhere. So I just like I move it into the finish the half lap or whatever it was. It was on quite far side of the course. I still remember to a degree, like I know exactly where on the course it was in terms of like proximity to the clubhouse. And I brought it in and I parked it along the other 8 or 10 that are lined up there, and like it is kind of a bit competently sheepish, like kind of just doing your stuff, going about what you're doing, but like not wanting to like discuss too much about what's happened in your day yet. And at this point, Jim, I'm still like kind of fucking figuring out whether I've broken anything or not. I'm just like I'm a bit, and I don't recall even now the interaction with the guys I was with. I remember the 2 dudes I was with, 2 brothers, but I don't remember if like, because I, in clipping the older brother, I don't know if like he had come to like even help me or engage me or anything like this. But regardless, I'm just like walking back to the change area that were like almost like locker room type setup, like just like Canada Prairie, just hideous. What I'm trying to get to you, but regardless, I go into this where I got out of in the pits to go into the locker area. I not just like run into somebody. I run into definitely like one of the employees, if not the fucking owner, who had given us like the pep talk of like, "Hey, how's your run?" Just just like, "Hey, how's your run?" And I was just like, okay, it was all right. And fuck me, Jim. Take this to my grave. It was one of the fucking easily one of the weirdest, like real memory of your, not childhood, but like late teens. Like, fuck, this still it's seared into my memory and I'll take it to the grave. He just, we had our little talk and I like, oh man, you say you think go faster than that, yeah, but, I'm pretty good, I wouldn't kick you out of bed for giving me one of them, just some bullshit fucking yarn that I'm spinning. And he's like, "Oh, okay, well, thanks for coming. You can go back to the locker room or get there's free orange juice or whatever the fuck he said to me." And I turned and I went into the locker room, Jim. And I remember it was like one of those, oddly, I don't know, maybe it was like a fucking ex-theater unit or something, but it had not only like in the locker dressing rooms, like a wide, like a long mirror, like a green room mirror, but I remember it also had like multiples of like track lighting around it, like quite like a green room, right? Like a pretty dramatic fucking dressing room. And I fucking turned and looked at it, Jim, and there was like, they're bigger than my fucking beard, Jim. There was a hunk of sod, like grass, that was hanging out of like the face shield of my helmet and was like draped on my shoulder like I was carrying fucking vegetation with me, Jim Grant. I kid you fucking not, right? Like I just like looked at this big wide mirror and just like thought, holy shit, fuck, like took the helmet off and just thought, how the fuck could he not have known that something crazy had happened? Like, who the fuck would ever, how could I have ever explained that, Jim? If you just, why is there like half a bushel of good Canadian fucking prairie soil hanging off your shoulder, you dickhead? And he didn't, thank fuck. But like, it was just one of those moments of like, people it's like the gorilla playing basketball, right? They just like don't they can be looking at things, but they don't necessarily have to be receiving it, processing it. And it's just that hiding in plain view, that's the world that we're in right now. And I heard it spoken wonderfully, passionately online again this week. But just a friend who lives in Cyprus, in discussion about like, why aren't people reacting, like the boiling frog, basically assessing why aren't people reacting to this draconian shield that's falling over all of our lives. And he was quite disarmingly nice and just saying like, understandably, and I believe this also, I think people just escape into their own reality tunnels, and they don't want to deal with the shit you and I talk about all the time every day. I get that, and I understand that that's probably what people do. They just, why not just like shut it out? You see it all the time recently. Just I'm closing my Twitter account. This is goodbye, cruel world. Everybody's happening a lot because people just don't want to be drawn into the despair we're dealing with. So I felt like, one of those things that I usually would be more caustic towards somebody who's that like disarming of what I call, I don't know how you feel, I'm closing my Twitter account. Oh, you're a quitter then. Like I'm a little more, how you have to be in this conversation. More people need to join Twitter. More people need to join Facebook and get in a conversation about our futures, I feel. But I did feel that this buddy, I just thought, well, that's nice, because you also have to realize not everybody's capable. Not everybody has the like fortitude to just constantly swim through shit that is the front pages of any news that we know.
Well, that's why I do this podcast.
Yeah.
Shit. 1 hour a week.
Yes. Because sometimes it's just you can't, right? Not every day.
Bringing us on to this week's shit.
Here we go.
Yeah. This is from the 4th of June. This is the BBC. Face coverings to be mandatory on public transport. Yeah. Wearing face coverings will be compulsory on public transport in England from 15th of June, the Transport Secretary has said. Grant Shapps said every precaution must be taken as passenger numbers were expected to increase when lockdown measures were eased further.
Yeah. Of course. Have you seen, I love this as well, that they're at the same time, and it somewhat shows our predicament, doesn't it, Jim, that they're recommending that you take other modes of transport down at the train station. Just like there's little billboards, they're like, could you have driven here today? What, are you completely out of your fucking mind? Like that's where we're at, Jim. They're dissuading people from taking public transport. And it kind of, I don't think a lot of people maybe who watch this, or some who might internationally, might not realize, and it may be the same almost everywhere internationally. It's just like, it's quite we're in a busy time, a lot of people on the planet. I'm talking before we were all locked down for the cold. That we don't have to digress down that rabbit hole. But the point being that the UK, you find this as a Canadian new here, that like everything's busy all the time. That's what it's like here. Like, how are the hotel bookings? Like, a year and a half in advance. Like, just places tend to be packed more than not. This is, and I'm talking now like inadequate services, Jim, which are like the trains, right? It's renowned, especially even down in your neck of the woods. Just packed trains, just nobody with it, just people hanging out at trains everywhere. And now, they're able to be even more restrictive about who is allowed to be on them by the face mask rule. And at the same time, a lot of people will rather not deal with the face mask rule. And I expect, actually, Jim, because it's not that extreme a climate here, one of the largest exploding micro businesses on the planet is like mini bikes and mopeds and like, especially like after the London congestion charge, for example, was implemented. That was one of the major explosions of micro industries, right? Just like everybody got on a fucking moped to get around, to be able to go back into town and have it not cost them like their job or their, their extra money. So I think not everyone understands that in the UK, the buyer is like just trash, whereas the seller is like, they don't care if you come on the train. They couldn't give a fuck if you ever get on one of their trains ever again, and so they're like, making it more difficult. It's just, we just live in madness. But what most people, and I think I know, most people haven't also either addressed for themselves or understood, is that they don't want you in a car either. Like, we're now in the great crunch, the great reset, as they're calling it, Jim, and that means that, if you're not royalty, you're not going to be driven around on any of the smart roads. They were built to be smart enough that you ain't going to be on them.
Coverings must be worn on buses, trams, trains, coaches, aircraft, and ferries. Very young children, disabled people, and those with breathing difficulties would be exempt, he said. Do you remember our episode where we talked about the guy in the plague bearer mask that we?
Yeah,
was on there, maybe episode 3 or 4 or anything like that. And we were saying the police went round to what was it? Have a word with him, something like that. Not to arrest him, but have a word with him. Yeah. Isn't it funny now that those same officers might be going round to his house and go, we told you not to wear that. Well, now it's going to be law that you have to wear, because they don't actually specify what kind of mask, I don't think. Let me just scroll down here. I mean,
not scary ones, Jim.
Yeah, I mean,
no scary ones.
Well, I mean, what happens if you were to wear a GIMP mask with a surgical thing over the top of it or something like that?
You're
do you know what I mean?
Like I wouldn't know. What do you want to know about that, Jim? I'll surprise you on episode 12. You remind me at the end of this, and I'll surprise you episode 12.
Well, we were talking only the other day about doing more things with the podcast, getting on guests, and getting the technology for you to be able to join us out on the road or something like that. There's sketch number 1, isn't it? What happens when Craig goes on to from after June the 15th? What happens when Craig Campbell, star of Michael McIntyre's Roadshow, wears a GIMP mask on UK public transport?
Let's see what happens.
Do we have the technology to be able to put on the theme over the background?
I'll tell you what happens again.
We're learning new technology.
I'm caught within a mile of that place.
Say that again?
I tell you, if I am caught within a mile of that place, we'll be arrested before we get off the ground. They see me back there again. It's him! He's got the GIMP mask again.
We can tell it's him because we can see the beard coming out of him underneath.
Exactly. Yeah. Who is it? Which guy is it?
He's got the beard coming out of the GIMP mask and some sort of Indian stone up his ass.
So that's him. That's the guy. Let me see that stone.
We've seen him on McIntyre's Roadshow. Yeah. So, next article here. This is 31st of May. This is the Telegraph by Laura Donnelly. Avoid singing or shouting when meeting with family or friends, scientists warn. Groups of 6 from different households can meet from Monday, but research suggests raising your voice can increase risk. Singing or shouting when meeting with friends and family can increase the risk of spreading coronavirus. But government scientific advisors have urged such groups to rein their excitement in, warning that raised voices may be more likely to allow the spread of COVID-19. Basically, government's rules are, well, we're going to allow you to speak to each other now, but you keep it down.
Son, is that you? Yeah, Mom, I'm just coming over to visit for a while. Oh, how are you doing? I did it my way. It's like, no! Christmas, Jim. We're going to have this is insane, but it's probably true. They're going to recommend, I'm sure publicly and officially, against Christmas caroling. We're living in a world where they canceled the D-Day celebrations, but that they have to keep doing these official decrees. Like they have to officially, like the nanny state, where you can visit under the parameters of this many people coming between households of families who know each other, but don't sing, or what were the other diktats? Not singing or.
Oh, I've changed it now to move on to the article. What was it?
Yeah. What other things can't you do? It's just ridiculous. Talking loudly, gesticulating. Like if you have any Italian relatives, they just can't come over. Basically, is how that goes. Just like anybody with a lisp. Just any.
I tell you what, I bet they're glad that what was it, Roy Hattersley from the 80s. I bet they're glad that he's not in the House of Commons anymore. Wasn't he famous for spitting every time he spoke?
Oh no, really?
What a threat to
What an
COVID-19. Was it Roy Hattersley? I think I'm getting right. The old spitting image dummies.
Oh my
Roy Hattersley,
God.
always the one. I think he was the one always spitting all the time. So yeah.
Oh my God.
It's like a Monty Python sketch, where the Holy Grail, where the guy's trying to break into song all the time, the guy in the castle, and John Cleese, I think it is, trying to stop it. Was it? I forget now, but it's more and more like a
pantomime.
Sketch. Yeah, so
to interrupt you, Jim, that's got to play into somewhat how the Brits, I think, just as a performer in this part of the world, that it's a psychology that you can tap into, that whole pantomime type of dialogue. And it just wouldn't shock me if that's what the government, via various agencies that I don't even need to mention. If people want to actually quiz us, I'll let you know what my theories are regarding that. But the psychological operation that's taking place on us, if it keys into those, cultural specificities, that just wouldn't shock me at all, Jim. Honestly, wouldn't shock me at all. Just because Brits react to that. Oh, we can visit our mom and dad now, but we're not allowed to sing. Okay, just like what? Just you almost couldn't tell anybody else that without
just saying it makes me laugh.
I'll bet. It's just of course, it's just increasingly nuts. It's just increasingly nuts. It's so nuts.
And again, I want to point out, we're fully aware that almost 40,000 Brits have died during COVID-19, but here at Cruise, we
60 actually, Jim, if you want to be fair, but
yeah,
nearly 20,000 of those are possibly COVID deaths. You got to get your numbers right. Nearly.
We talk about serious stuff and we have a laugh when we can in these strange times. I must say, by the way, you had a lovely singing voice. I'd never heard you sing before.
Oh, thanks, Jim.
So, comedy, singing, you're a porn star as well. You've done it all, Mr. Campbell.
Where does this end? Where does this well of talent end? Here, now, actually. Yeah, I got some pipes on me, Jim. Yeah, I'm a ball of surprises.
So, speaking of pipes and singing, that sounds to be like what the American prosecutors want Prince Andrew to sing like a canary, by the sounds of it, because prosecutors have formally requested to talk with Prince Andrew in Epstein investigation. This is by NBC News, and this is yesterday, June the 8th. Prince Andrew's lawyers responded Monday saying that they offered his help as a witness on at least 3 occasions this year. Federal prosecutors in New York have formally requested through the British government to speak with Prince Andrew as part of their criminal investigation into Jeffrey Epstein's history of sexual abuse, according to a person familiar with the matter. Mr. Campbell.
Person familiar with the matter. We've decided to ask, who is that? An expert, a lawyer, an international lawyer, a professor of international law? No, just some interested person. Someone who has a keen interest in this. It's as mad as it sounds, but it's for whatever, back to the pantomime reference. If there's a verifiable enmity between those parties, the Department of Justice of the United States, or at least in its present incarnation under the Trump administration, if it actually is as adversarial with the now hostile witness as is being purported by, I've read this in the news, so it's certainly mainstream, that there's potential that he could be interrogated by U.S. officials on British soil. I mean, this is barring any other unseen events. So that's that's a curiosity. It's strange that out of all of this, the clamor for him to be held responsible or charged, that he's actually just being called to be witness for the benefit of what we don't know yet. So that's it's a pretty shameful plummet, though. I think we can say. Have you not seen in the same week? I think, like, even in the last few days, that he's also been removed from or has stepped down from any and all duties regarding the royal family. So I mean, it's just like a former prince, kind of screwing, not hanging with someone who was both screwing and trafficking really, young teens, to say the least, if not worse. But for Andrew, just to be like, the big lesson, Jim, we all, you learn it. And I'm talking even when you're 18 and 19. Don't bang teenagers. Like, just don't. It's just sticky. It's a sticky place to be. Like, whether you're 45 and a royal or not, don't stick your dick in teens. And that's always going to be a truism. And I'm talking like, that's just so you don't die from a dad killing you with a baseball bat, Jim. So that's like, I'm just thinking like prudently from that point. I'm not talking about American justice. I'm just talking about like Uncle Vic, like, don't screw teens. That's the end of that.
So, speaking of screwing going wrong, this is an article from RT. This is the 3rd of June. This is about Professor Lockdown, aka Professor Pants Down, aka Neil Ferguson. UK's COVID-19 czar admits crippling restrictions made no difference. Where's the outrage? And that's the article asking the question.
It's just
by Jason O'Toole, who has worked as a senior feature writer for the Irish Daily Mail, a columnist for the Irish Sunday Mirror, and senior editor of Hot Press magazine. He's also the author of several best-selling books. So Professor Neil Ferguson probably woke up this morning breathing a massive sigh of relief because he hadn't been ripped to shreds again in the British newspapers for this second time in just under a month, this time over his startling admission that there has been no significant difference in the levels of COVID-19 suppression when comparing the UK and Sweden. And that was a comparison we'd been making from episode 1. Craig, we weren't sitting here going, we told you so. I mean, I was absolutely.
We are now.
Observing the lockdown. I went into, hibernation mode wherever possible before the lockdown. So I'm not criticizing the lockdown per se. I'm just saying that I didn't go into the cult of shutting my mind off to other possibilities of scientific data, i.e. Sweden. After all, I said, I remember on our first podcast, we're in a new situation now. Yeah. This is all new. Why not look to as many different data points as possible to draw as many conclusions and drop the egos and move with the information as it comes in? It's okay to be wrong on something that you have no idea about. This was a learning curve for the whole of humanity. So it's okay to go, I've changed my mind based on new data.
Or even look at more than one set of data.
Yeah.
It's like, open it up to tender, Jim. Let's go for 2 sets of data. No, not us. Incredible, isn't it? Incredible.
So the British scientist known as Professor Lockdown has undermined the draconian policy he unleashed on the world by confessing that Britain hasn't fared any better in tackling the disease than the laid-back Scandies.
Yeah.
So
And just quick, remember how many people he said would likely die that put the fear of God in people and continues to this day? What was it? 500,000 was his first projection, and in the States he expected 2.2 million was the number. And I'm not a numerology guy, but something tells me that if you really dug into those numbers, they'd be significant. just say, I don't know nothing about Satanism, Jim. I'm not claiming to be an expert in Satanism. I'm just saying, if you start to look up the numbers that Professor Pants-down chucks around and happen to stick in the media, all I'm saying is you might find some coinky dinks.
I mean, it's better to err on the side of caution just in case this thing was really, really deadly. But at the same time, there was just no excuse for domestic lockdown and international borders open, both or, neither. So Britain had like the worst of both worlds, really.
Remember though, Jim, remember this was based on a projection of, at this point, 3,000 people had died in a country of 1.4 billion, right? Like that's how extreme the projection. But we're going to go to a country of 65 million. How many people do you think will die there? 500,000. It's like, okay, what about a country of 355 million like America? 2.2 million will die. It's just like, okay, nice to meet you, sir. But the British government is like, somebody get that guy's number. We need a man on the team. It's just incredible. It's nuts. It's just I immediately think of all the things I hate about that guy, Jim. Just like, and they're all statistical, by the way. Nothing to do with like any of the other slander against him. It's just from foot and mouth to today. It's just like, why is this guy still here? Why?
So, next article is from the Telegraph. This is by Christopher Hope. Britain needs new royal yacht Britannia to provide morale boost, says former Trade Minister. Digby Jones says he would ask small export-facing companies to offer $5,000 each, with large firms offering more to help fund construction. So, 3 months of lockdowns, laws passed, not allowed to have sex with anyone that you are not living with, small business might be collapsing, no pubs open, queues at the supermarkets, but
give them a yacht.
Go and get the country a new royal yacht. That will make it all disappear. Britain will be happy again. I'm H-A-P-P-Y. I know I am. I'm sure I am. I'm H-A-P-P-Y. Because there's a new Royal Yacht Britannia.
Up in the back, looking right, just in a tight dress. I think I might just they got a yacht. Yeah. Party. God, it just shows how detached they are, Jim. It's just a detachment syndrome. It's incredible. It's incredible.
Sometimes I think it's at detachment. You're right, and I wouldn't know what it is in this case. But also sometimes I think it's
they're aliens.
Like
the lizard thing, right? It's the lizard. You knew you were going to say lizards.
No, it's just
I hit the nail on the head, didn't I?
The corporations and governments really haven't met any resistance on anything majorly for quite some time. So, so why not?
Yeah. Just keep ratcheting it up. Just keep.
And there will be more that the more you ratchet up, the more people will just go, I don't want to know. Just let me just watch Netflix 24/7,
Sensation overload.
Just what you were saying earlier, it can be sort of overload and stuff. But here's something that might genuinely cheer the country up.
Maybe
It certainly might.
maybe that's why I'm starting to, every time you read a new story, I start to shake and shit myself. Maybe that's what's going on. It's the we've finally gone Pavlovian. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but that's like,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
ding ding.
It's just like, okay, let's watch the news. Just sit there, piss and shit yourself on the couch while you convulse. Is there any dessert, honey? It's like the new family model, the new family unit. And of course, Honey comes in and is half robot. Just like we live in Madland, Jim. But yeah, Christ.
Well, this may cheer us up. It may certainly cheer up
I
some
bet.
people in our industry, or it may even allow people in our industry to cheer people up if we can get the
Okay.
comedy set back up and running again. But this is an article from the 7th of June by Dave Burke from the Mirror. Pubs in England to reopen on June the 22nd in effort to save 3.5 million jobs. Ministers are said to be desperate to get the hospitality industry open again, with millions of jobs feared to be on the line if the lockdown is not eased this month. So, if they do reopen in 2 weeks, boozers will have to serve drinks outside as social distancing rules will remain in place. Chancellor Rishi Sunak is reputed to be among the group of ministers calling themselves the Save Summer Six, hoping to get pubs, bars, and restaurants open this month. So people might be able to drink outside, but again, no singing. You better ban those pianos in those pubs,
I thought you were
especially in
gonna.
the Cockney East End.
I thought
My
you
old man's a dustman. You stop that right now. You're killing people.
not here. Not
Yeah,
here, buddy. You heard the man on the TV.
yeah.
I thought you were going to say, in an effort to save 3.5 million suicides, they're opening the pubs. I had no idea what numbers you were punching there. It's like, oh god, that doesn't sound too high actually. If you're on, so the 22nd of June is going to be the longest day of the year, and the longest morning of the well, I guess it would be the shortening morning of the year.
Yeah. So we shall see what that means for the comedy industry.
Food Street. Well, if they're not allowed to yell and scream, I know that the same template is I'm shot, Jim. I ain't
Yeah,
no,
I was just thinking that.
Jesus Christ, they're gonna let me perform till fucking heat death. But I know in Canada, particularly, it's already a contentious issue, and I hope it doesn't come to here. I hope it's obviously just they allow us to perform. But I know at home they're holding comedy clubs, particularly, to a different standard of restriction than just like a sports bar. And of course, the argument is being made quite rightly that people who are like high-fiving each other and hugging and cheering and splashing drinks when their favorite team scores a touchdown or whatever are no more contagious than a comedian on stage with social distancing created in the room, which is already, by the way, I don't say that as an affirmation of that behavior, but that's what the restrictions are. It's utter madness to me, and I can't understand any of it, or I don't agree with any of it. But the simple fact that a comedian is not allowed to tell jokes 40 feet away from the nearest table, and in the next bar there are people like literally at tables eating chicken wings together. It's fucking bullshit. It's bullshit. Like, this just needs to end. Did you see? And I can't believe we haven't mentioned it today, Jim. In New Zealand, they're like seemingly with less restrictions or the same restrictions that they had, other than the allowance of their police allowed to walk into their homes whenever they want. They are now essentially COVID free and are back to normal, as in no restrictions that are in place anywhere else in the world, to my knowledge, at this time, Jim. Which is like, I hate the current administration in New Zealand, but I can't argue with the statistical outcome of their social restrictions. And I'm glad that there's somewhere in our world right now, Jim, somewhere that isn't completely mental. And I don't understand. You may know, in fact, yourself, they also had more draconian track and trace than almost anywhere else. So I don't know if all of those requirements are now like dissolved, But as far as I know, they're opening up, and I hope that means that comedy clubs are going to be going as quickly as possible, because it's just, we're living in madness. Needs to come down yesterday.
Well, I don't have anything on New Zealand, but my next article that I've brought up is along those lines. It's from MSN. It's by Kate Feldman, and this is. Nope, no, I've got a wrong dated article. Actually, this is from the 20th of April, by the looks of it. Sweden claims coronavirus success after keeping country open, says herd immunity imminent. So, yep, I've put up the wrong dated article, but I'll just move on to the next article anyway. This is something completely different. Again,
we're flexible here.
Yeah, this is from The Independent. This is by John Stone. Boris Johnson facing backlash after scrapping pledge to keep chlorinated chicken out of British supermarkets. The Tory backbenchers warned that government was in for a rebellion on the issue, while animal welfare groups and opposition parties accused Boris Johnson of refusing to stand up to Donald Trump and sacrificing food standards in the name of a trade deal. Downing Street signalled on Thursday that imports of lower standard American food were now on the table in the negotiations, a reversal of the long-standing promise. So I saw an article where Boris Johnson said he'd never said he'd lied or anything like that. So people can say that to him then. But the political answer would be, oh, I didn't lie. I just changed my mind later. I didn't lie. I was telling the truth at the time. I've just changed my mind now.
You just set me off again. I didn't hear half of what you said because you made me laugh again, Jim. You keep dropping these clangers and then acting like I'm supposed to sit here straight. And if you recall the article where Boris Johnson said that he doesn't lie, just like, what are you kidding me? Completely made a.
Have you not seen that article?
I have, yeah, of course.
Yeah. So you know, I was like, yeah, it was all over social media.
It's madness.
Sort of the articles that you see everywhere, lots of other people posting. I tend not to bring them on here because unless they're funny or something like that. But just that's what I mean about earlier when we were talking about, there's such blatancy.
Yes.
And again, I'm not going into the pro wrestling paradigm. That doesn't mean I was a Labour supporter anyway. I just don't like being lied to by any political party, really, or any politician.
Anybody. It just kind of stands to reason, doesn't it? Not like
so you were talking
about
test and trace earlier. This is an article. Let me just find the date. Oh, I can't seem to find the date on this, but it is from The Independent and by it's Rob Merrick. Test and trace system data to be kept by government for 20 years. Disclosure comes after ministers rejected plea to pass an emergency law to ease privacy concerns. Data provided by people through the new test and trace program to defeat coronavirus will be kept for 20 years. The disclosure coming after ministers rejected a plea from MPs to, just rereading the headline. Information including name, address, date of birth, phone numbers and email addresses will be collected and stored by the NHS for people with COVID-19 or with symptoms. That's interesting because there's quite a lot of symptoms there. Individuals will be able to ask for their information to be deleted, but Public Health England has warned this is not an absolute right and that it might need to continue to use your information. A new privacy notice states that a private firm, Amazon Web Services, is providing the secure storage location for the information collected by NHS Test and Trace. So, yeah, you can ask for it to be deleted, and maybe,
Yeah, it's not going to be deleted, and you and I both know that. And it's not going to be held even secure in the confines of the data security of the country itself. And it's going to be given, as has already been mentioned in the article, to a third party. And this will never end, Jim. This is an invasion of privacy, of course, and data is value, as you and I both know. We're in the era of data. Data on fellow human beings is a valuable commodity. And the government themselves have proven time and time again that they can't be trusted with the data that they already hold of ours, let alone my favorite counter would be right now, Jim, the bit that makes me most annoyed and angry is how poor the government has been on keeping record of violent criminals. That's not uncommon or unheard of crisis in terms of local police departments, for example, not passing on to national databases the statistics of the region, or even worse, losing or deciding. It's always an odd one when it's decided to not be kept or recorded because of like clearing of databases, in terms of like clearing storage space in the era of unlimited data. But you have police departments, particularly like the police department in Hull, that didn't pass along the violent underage criminal record of the Soham killer, which has always sat in my craw a little bit, always been a bit annoying, that somebody who later went on to kill 2 other children had his information not passed along from a local police department to the school vetting system that checks anybody who's going to be an employee of a school. So suddenly you had somebody who had like violent criminal convictions against underage kids not being warned down the road, and now you've got 2 other dead kids. And it's just like, that's the reality of the bureaucracy of what government does with information. They're not trustworthy with the most important information, let alone how willy-nilly they're going to be with a tranche, with a cache of the kind of information that a track and trace program is going to get. And that's before, like I've mentioned mentioned on other episodes, there's back doors already. There's already places that the government is sending your data, including to the military, without your consent, certainly. But as the article mentions, that seems like it's not your right anyway to argue. So we're in crazy land as far as being treated like cattle.
Yep. And I thought I'd dig up this article from about a month ago that I was going to bring up on one of our previous podcasts, but never got round to it. But I thought it would be a good time to sort of take a look back. I like to do that in career, and I'll do that as COVID becomes a thing of the past. And I'll be, as we talk about news in weeks and years to come, hopefully, then I'll bring up some of the archive of the news I've kept and go, oh, here's an article that I think is interested and dovetails into this from about 5 years ago, but this is from a month ago. Sometimes it's good to just put things into perspective, and you have a little bit of information here, a little bit of information there, and you think, well, if you put the 2 things together, actually you can see a bigger part of the picture. So this is the Telegraph. Michael Cogley, 5th of May, how Britain risks walking into a surveillance state, difficulties proving immunity, and a need for live facial recognition may be a bridge too far for the government.
Yes.
So there you go, and that's the whole article.
Thank you, pushback man. Thank you. Yes, it is a bridge too far. It's ridiculous. The necessity to have everybody marked and tracked is just they're just nuts. They're authoritarian, technocrats. They're terrifying. They're the most terrifying people that are. And why is this happening, Jim? It's happening on the back of a miscalculated global illness, on an over-embellished global illness. All of this is just like every one of these things that you're mentioning that's making us shake and shit ourselves could just be nipped in the bud by saying, "Oh, sorry, we thought it was something else. Let's go back to 3 months ago," because we completely overestimated what the impact of what we're reacting to is relevant now, And they're not doing that, Jim. They're just going to do it. No, especially, the British government in cahoots with several major globalist entities are just full steam ahead on being complete psychonauts. When you got New Zealand opening up, and you got the Yanks doing the same, and places are declaring themselves COVID free, and instead you've still got people that are like, yeah, and then when the tadpole is 3 minutes old, that's when we're going to get the first vaccine into its eyeball, so that it does, that we just live in this world of like all the psychos that are reacting to the BS are still acting like the BS is believed by everyone else, and it's not anymore. I mean, it's obvious that there's even under more conservative voices on social media are like starting to question, like, why is this still happening? Why are you still doing this? Why are you still applying the full throttle maniac when so much has been proven to not be as great a threat as it was 2 months ago? It's madness. We're in madness land.
So this is from Sky News. This is police planning their own contact tracing system over concerns about government's version. Forces fear entire stations could shut down and undercover officers could be placed in danger through the national system. This is from Friday, the 5th of June, by Roland Manthorpe. Police forces are planning, under the plans, police officers who test positive for COVID-19 would not give their contacts to NHS contact tracers, but would instead inform their police force, who would take their contact tracing to identify anyone at risk of catching the virus. Yeah. So it's basically the police seem to have the same concerns that you just expressed.
We got another one for you to deal with, Brad. Okay, you go meet the family. They just they handed off to another, ironically, undercover dude who goes under an alias as a representative of the undercover dude, and represents the track and trace component of the undercover dude. It's like, I mean, but something's pretty fucking dark and dire when the cops are like, Jesus Christ, don't get me on camera. Whoa, just anytime the police are putting themselves forward as the civil libertarian vanguard, you have to be pretty suspicious of what they're going to do with your information if you don't happen to be part of the thin line of blue.
Mm-hmm. So our next article tonight is from the Independent, and it is can't quite see when it's 2 days ago, so that would be on the 7th. Elon Musk says Amazon should be broken up after it refuses to sell controversial COVID-19 book. Elon Musk has broken his recent Twitter hiatus to call out fellow billionaire Jeff Bezos over Amazon's decision to ban a controversial book about the coronavirus. The SpaceX and Tesla boss tweeted in response to a screenshot posted by the author of the self-published ebook titled Unreported Truths About COVID-19 and Lockdowns, which showed a message from Amazon's content review department. The message stated, "Your book does not comply with our guidelines. As a result, we are not offering your book for sale."
Wow.
Replying to the author's tweet, Mr. Musk wrote, "This is insane," at Jeff Bezos. Shortly after, he tweeted, "Time to break up Amazon. Monopolies are wrong." So that all began with him going on about what you were saying. He was going back onto Twitter and having another argument.
Yeah, and Amazon says, "We apologize for the inconvenience. Can we send you a copy of Mein Kampf?" Just so you're on board. It's just we live again. It's not dissimilar to the previous story with the police. When you're living in a world where the forefront of the civil liberties fight is being fought by Elon fucking Musk, we're just in like crazy town, Jim. We're downtown crazy town, because I've since our earlier conversations with Mr. Musk, I've looked a little deeper into some of his ambitions and investments and current projects. And there, if I think you and I are au fait, but I don't know how much of the audience would be as familiar with the impact that we're now seeing so much of, and people should be more aware of the impact of technocracy on our current climate of reality, and that all plays very, very deeply and strongly into the medical revamping of the human genome, to turn us into part person, part machine. The idea of having a human cloud memory, being like a uniform knowledge between human networks, and the comfort that people have speaking the things I'm saying to you right now, Jim, that they're just like talking about these things like, oh yeah, and then we'll do that, and that's Tuesday, and then next month we're gonna like there. It's not like there's any break on these mad scientists implementing the merging of technology in hardware and the human form, the human body. It's one thing to have a titanium hip, but it's another thing to have the same thoughts as the human network that your brain is merged with. And the comfort that they have, and they're talking about this, Jim. They're talking about like us not being around in our current incarnation. They're talking about humanity, and I'm talking like the World Economic Forum, for example. I'm talking very, very mainstream players are tied into this philosophy, and it's going to become more and more relevant in people's lives. If you're not like hearing or understanding anything that I'm saying right now, it should, I think, shock people that this is part of anyone's ambition. But that's what Elon's been like. He's been delving into that on the side. But at the same time, somebody's got a controversial COVID book on Amazon. He's like got Bezos against the wall. Listen, pal, if you want to find out who's a real billionaire puncher in this world, it's just real like to me, it's hard for me to not imagine that it's theatrical, Jim, because it's just at the same time that like not Bezos, but Musk is jizzing fucking satellites into the sky at like ridiculous rates. There's people all around the world watching Elon Musk's satellites enter the lower Earth's orbit as like fireworks entertainment at night, right, Jim? Like did he not have to?
Or thinking it was something out of Close Encounters for the Third Kind.
Yeah, and it's just like a billionaire shooting off his 5G load, right? It's just like we live in crazy time. But did they not have to start to paint the satellites, or they did paint the satellites to take away their visibility? Do you recall anything of that?
I hear something about it now. We'll dig it up at some point. But
you remember when they're like when they're daisy chaining them into the sky? You remember that happening, right?
Oh yeah, there's loads of them up there for sure.
Yeah, just like that guy is upset that someone can't sell their COVID book on Amazon. I think, Jim, all these censorship issues and all of these restriction issues to me are just own goals, as far as I'm concerned. Like own goal. It's not until you and I and anybody in humanity makes real steps in their own financial decisions that any voting diplomatically or democratically will be impressed upon anyone else. If to me, it sounds like a clear-cut case of Amazon becoming judge and jury and executioner of what is acceptable in a censorship role. And if that's the case, get your fucking socks from somewhere else. Right? It's like for the 30p that it's different. They're cunts. They're known. They're cunts to their employees. They're famous, and in fact, it's funny. There's crossovers in Bezos' world to Musk's world, just on a robotics scale. Bezos is one of the most robotics-oriented billionaires on the earth in terms of like automation and his interest in automating his own employees. And Musk is similarly, minded. So they're almost. I think they're lovers. I'll bet they're lovers. I'll bet there's like some sexual tension going on there. I have to say that only with half my cheek bit.
of course, Mr. Campbell doesn't require a source for that statement. Can't provide one for that
See him
statement.
walking around in those tight trousers. Come
Yeah,
on, come
that's
on.
how we
You don't
that's
name
how
your
we like to go here on the
wing
cruise.
fighter
I
unless
stick
you're a little bit, you know. Come on.
I stick to the sources and the facts, and then you pick up the facts and you go, "Rah!" And that's what makes it a good podcast.
Who brought this in here?
So, speaking, you were talking about people treating their own people badly,
Maybe.
talking about Amazon. Well, here's another example here. We're talking about the CCP in China. This is a New York Times article. Defying Beijing, thousands in Hong Kong hold Tiananmen vigil. Residents across the city gathered to commemorate the victims of China's 1989 crackdown, despite a police ban. Hours earlier, the city made mocking China's anthem a crime. So, and that's from June the 4th by Javier C. Hernandez. Chanting slogans like "Liberate Hong Kong," thousands of people in Hong Kong flouted a police ban on Thursday as they gathered to memorialize the Tiananmen Square massacre. I also had an article. I'll see if I can bring it up. Something about the UK is going to offer citizenship to some people from Hong Kong. I'll see if I've got that article loaded up, ready to go. But
That's the Tiananmen massacre that had absolutely nothing to do with CIA infiltration. You know, as ironically we're dealing with right now. I heard it mentioned this week, Jim. You might have heard the same thing. The American Spring, in reflection of the Arab Spring, we now have in America going on the American Spring. It's just like, yeah, kind of the same people, probably. Like, yeah, probably true. If the Arab Spring was in any way organic, then you could consider that the American Spring is as organic, or certainly as organic as I think if people looked into to Tiananmen Square, or even more recently the Hong Kong riots. I mean, you know, if you don't know that the Yanks are training protesters in protesting, if you don't know that's happening, or even organizing protests, I'm not saying that the protests aren't valid. I'm not saying that any protest, especially against like a draconian government system, or one that we know the CCP doesn't even allow, you know, dissent, and you got people being pulled into police stations for what they said on Twitter, and, you know, being handcuffed while they're being interviewed. Who knows what happened to them afterwards? I'm not a fan of the CCP. However, the idea that we're just some benign force in protests against their behaviors, that's not true either.
Well, if you look back at Charlottesville and you look back at a lot of the DNC stuff and the Sanders stuff and everything, I'm loath to sort of, without sourcing it, I hate stuff, but just to give an idea on where I think the current troubles in America are headed. Yes, police brutality is awful, but he did get arrested pretty quickly. So for me, I think it's a tale of two Georges. If you go and look back at some of the people who financed on record some of the other protests, I think this may be a case of this coming up again. But again, I can't prove it at this point. But I think it may be a case of two Georges: peaceful protesters protesting for George Floyd, non-peaceful rioters rioting for George Soros. So I think it'll be a tale of two Georges, and I think it's a legitimate concern against police brutality, dovetailing with people who have a legitimate agenda to destabilize and buy up for pennies on the dollar. But that's purely speculation on my part, based on having looked at some articles from over the last 4 years of social unrest in the United States.
I agree with that, Jim.
Involved in the funding. So this is the New York Post. This is by
They're good.
3rd of June by Bob Fredericks. This is from Trump. Strange that coronavirus didn't spread throughout China. President Trump on Wednesday called it a strange deal that the coronavirus was largely contained to the city of Wuhan within China, but at the same time spread all over the world. I ask this: why is it Wuhan? It came out of Wuhan. Why is it that it didn't go to all of China, but it went to the rest of the world? It went to Europe. It went to the world. It went to the United States. It didn't go to Beijing. the president said during an interview on Fox Radio.
Well, he also was quite illuminating in his interview live during 911, if you recall. He can, Trump can be quite lucid, including his opinion on both vaccines and vaccine injuries prior to his election. He's, he often can toe the line for the lucid, more libertarian approach to a problem. Maybe that's part of his, who knows what he's revealing or what he means. Maybe that's part of the 5G chess kind of, shake the board and brinkmanship, I guess, is what I'm describing. That sort of the North Korea type of saber rattling right up to the okay, we're all gonna die. Do you remember that, Jim? We're just like we're all kind of maybe we're gonna die on Monday. Maybe it'll be Tuesday late. Oh, Rodman's there. Maybe we'll live. It's just like total brinkmanship politics. But for Trump to be making lucid observations of the COVID story as we now know it, maybe he's just doing that to destabilize the WHO's narrative. Perhaps maybe he's playing that angle, which but I think that there's also a lot of deflection there because you and I particularly have dove quite deeply into the origins in Wuhan city and all roads leading from it. And there's also knowledge of what the Yanks know but aren't revealing themselves. So it's always weird when you see, someone of that administration, including particularly, Trump, talking about the particulars while at the same time not either dealing with or revealing other known particulars that seem as relevant. But why it didn't go through China? Why not? I think the proponents right away in my head, the counter me argues, Jim, that people would say, well, that's because the Chinese restrictions were so effective that it wasn't able to. And in that way, that's an argument for lockdown and why lockdowns are so effective. And I find that quite a scary narrative to travel down. And you and I, again, we again for intimately following it, we know that from the date of the lockdown in Wuhan, that immediately following, some 5 million people from the city of Wuhan escaped from Wuhan before they closed, right? So and you and I again know that the realization since that date to now that it's actually much wider in society than anybody ever thought or knew. The idea that 5 million people would escape from Wuhan and then just other people in China didn't happen to catch it because of the actions of the government. It's a valid question, whether it's Donald Trump asking it or the guy sitting beside you, 6 feet away on a park bench. It's weird. And it's one of the points that I always try and make, Jim, because it's like such a stark point that like, how can you say that 500,000 people in the UK are going to die or 2.2 million people in the US are going to die when in fact that like of all of China, of the 1.4 billion people that died in China, the now agreed, or the official number of about 4,000, but prior to the official number being elevated by 1,000 somewhat out of the blue by a recalculating of statistics, the fact is that prior to that, Wuhan itself was responsible for 3,000 of China's 3,300 deaths, Jim, right? In all of the rest of the 1.3 billion 854,000 a population of China, all of them got 300 deaths, right? It's just the computation of the overreach that statistical illumination provides, that you would then think that any other country is just going to everyone's going to die if you don't stay in your house. It's just that's just not true. We know that's not true by China. But I think what was going on, because you and I could be forgiven for thinking that it was more fatal than it was, we had good reason to believe, and still to this day do, that you can't trust the CCP's statistics. Right? So we knew back then that it didn't really matter what they were saying, who died in Wuhan or how much, because we could see the satellite reports that were showing them the sulfur dioxide emissions into the sky from every crematorium between Wuhan and fucking Tokyo, just like cooking fucking something all through the night, right? Like there were good reasons to think, aside from the phone numbers disappearing, somewhere between 21 and 2 million people have disappeared in China from January 1st, 2020 to today. So there's all kinds of reasons to have questions, but there's no reason really to have firm answers.
And the thing is, in order for that number of people to go missing, people would have noticed and people would have spoken out. But would we have heard them?
But not in China.
Yeah, would we have heard them given their internet restrictions, or would something that big have got out anyway? Because we can't prove those numbers. It's just
conjecture,
and it's interesting for sure. But the fact that you've got a regime that I believe would do something like that doesn't mean they did, but I believe they would.
Give them half a chance.
So literally, my opinion is, who knows really how many people died in China and from what? And in that, I can still include that the Chinese numbers may be somewhere near accurate, or at least as accurate as a panic-driven, oh, what's going on, as accurate. They might actually have some integrity to them. They might not be accurate, but they might not be deliberately misinformed. They might have just been, overwhelmed with the crisis and all that kind of stuff, all the way through to their complete fabrications and there's millions missing. I honestly have no idea what happened, and I think time will tell. Speaking of time, how are we doing for this podcast?
I think we can probably wrap any second, and I'll make we spoke a bit at the beginning, and funnily enough, now we're recording on the Skype. There's a clock right in front of me, Jim. Just like it's like perfect. It's like works perfectly. It's not skipped yet. It's not failed us, and there's a clock there. So we're at 1:25, and I don't know how much we spoke at the beginning, but I'd be interested in probably clipping some of that in. But to dovetail what we're talking about right now, which I like, is some of the stats that we can be more firm with and have come true like in the last couple of days, if not today. It's curious to see that more reliable statistics, like say Italy, that you and I both know have now been proven to have considered different interpretations of data. But essentially, that data, once it's all boiled down, becomes the reality that quite a high number in the kind of 90th percentile of people who pass away from COVID-19 do so with multiple comorbidities. So that was one of the first statistical reflections that we got to see, was Italy, and it was one of the first ones that we could semi-trust. Well, how much of a surprise is it that either today or yesterday it's now come out in the UK similar statistical numbers, almost exactly the same. In fact, 95% of people who passed away from COVID-19 in the UK are proven to, unfortunately, and it's a crude way to say it, but were at within a year or 6 months at death's door. They're hanging over the grave, and COVID kicked them in the ass. That's no surprise or huge revelation, Jim, because we've known that to be the case in other statistical representations. It's just it's strange that we have to go through all these theatrics of really no way, really, just like what Bloomberg said about Italy like a month and a half ago. Really? I just can't believe it. And children involved, just negligible, not even on the spectrum of a great, but we learned that again, did we? Wow. Well, can we go to school yet? Still no, huh? Okay. Well, we'll wait for those pubs to open while we're 6 feet away from each other. It's just we live in this fucking, we've heard that before thing. I keep hearing, Jim, the spike. We're waiting for the spike right now. Everybody's just like, because of the protests in London and because of the protests worldwide, because of, if you believe the connection with Minneapolis and the George Floyd death, the fact that like, oh, we're all waiting for a spike. It's like, no, we're not. We're not, because that we've been through that. There's other places that are all like, look at Paris right now, look at Sweden right now, look at where they're already in restaurants, where they're eating. Vegas right now is opened up. There's no massive second spike coming. There's little outbreaks that have been seen. I think there was one in Korea recently, one in Japan recently, but it's not like it's exploding again across the planet. The spike is happening. And now we're seeing, in fact, quite tellingly, the spike isn't happening. And in fact, I'm going to push this even further, Jim. The people that are like still scaremongering to keep the lockdown in place are using the like furthest, always, Jim, watch for this. They're always using the furthest gestation of the becoming symptomatic to become a contagious person. They're always using either the week or 2 weeks. That's when we're waiting, Jim. We're waiting for the explosion of the spike of deaths a week or 2 weeks from now, because it takes that long to gestate. They never recognize that we know that statistically they have found that from contraction to the manifestation of symptoms, the average is 5 days. The average is 5 days. To get it, like to have it happen at day 14 is just like astronomically rare in what they already know about COVID. And that's before you get into like the even more idiosyncratic ones of people at 22 days, 25 days. The record right now, a woman at 42 days, asymptomatic for like a month and 12 days, and then suddenly manifests symptoms at day 42. So we know what the anomalies are, but the lockdown loons, as I like to call them, are always using, well, we've got to wait, Jim. We've got to wait for the week or 2 weeks. And then if we don't suffer a spike, then maybe you can have a drink at the pub. You know, it's just like that kind of madness, when in fact, we know you're still nuts. Quit being nuts. Let us out of our homes. Let our lives back. Do you not get it yet? You've been hoodwinked. You've been fooled. Let us out of our fucking homes, you maniacs.
Do you remember early February, I did some maths looking at the guy from my neck of the woods down here in Brighton, from when he said he travelled along to China. And my analysis was somewhere between 4 to 9 days before people show symptoms. Yeah. Do you remember that was my early analysis?
Yes.
And I aired around the 4 to 6.
Yeah.
You know, that was my analysis in early February. Do you remember me saying that? I'd worked that out.
Accurate, Jim. You're a sooth. You're a sooth. You're a soothsayer.
Yeah. So it was all there. Everything's a get the camera right so you can get my hand. But it's all a statistical anomaly. It's all a bell curve, and you get your anomalies here and there. But the majority of the data fits in the middle, and the majority of the data tends to be under a week.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, I agree. I concur 100%. So we're just in this, these are things that you're saying, what? It was like 2 months ago, right? It's like 2 months ago, at least. Yeah. We're just like, quit playing like we're going to find out. It's always said ominously, right, Jim? Like, oh, you just wait. We'll see you in 12 and a half days, buddy. Just everyone's got this crazy hang time and then I presume they just go back into their storm cellar and eat root vegetables and peek out of their fucking gun slit, till like fucking 12 days ago. Who knows what's going on in this world, Jim? But it's just like, quit being mad cunts, please, as they say in the UK. Stop being a mad cunt for a bit. Go get a suntan, you dork.
So that's the message that Mr. Campbell will leave you with for our 11th.
We're going to get that put on a t-shirt.
Yeah. We could, cruise t-shirts, merchandising. Yeah.
Being a mad cunt.
Yeah. We should do that, cruise merchandise.
That's what do it for us, Jim, and take the profit. That's what we should do. Jesus.
What's that?
We should have someone do it for us and take the profit. That's what we should do.
Like all good capital.
You want to make t-shirts?
Yeah.
No, of course you don't. Nor
do I. To be a good middleman is to be a good businessman.
Yeah, right.
So that's been our 11th episode here of Cruise. Thank you for watching whatever time you clicked play. If you've enjoyed it, then please, if you're on Facebook, click like if you haven't on the page, if you haven't already. please click subscribe on our YouTube channel if you haven't done so already, and share them on social media. It all really does help. We're regularly getting up to about 700 views now whenever we do the sharing on our own
that's awesome
stuff. So if you've got any questions for us, just write it in the comments section of a YouTube video or tag Cruise in it on Facebook. Same if you've got any articles or news stories that you'd like us to discuss. We keep them to the mainstream, whatever, it doesn't matter from wherever the world they are, so long as they're mainstream, we will give them a chat about. And thank you ever so much for watching here this evening. Any closing comments, Mr. Campbell?
No, just that I'm sorry once again for our delay in release last week. We ran into a technical difficulty the 10th episode had 5 clips in it. As you've noticed, if you follow the cruise, you notice we have dropouts, and we gotta like marry things together sort of haphazard. And it doesn't change the content of what we're trying to get to you and for ourselves.
Today though, we used a new software today, didn't we?
Yeah, yes, we're stepping up, but regardless, we had one clip of 5 that was really that needed to be sent to Santa's workshop in London and repaired, which I can't believe it was. It was 35 minutes long, and it was technically fucked. And it got well. If you watch the episode, you'll see there's all kinds of like added frames and things to make it like I sent them dog shit on a motorbike in a courier's backpack, and they turned it into the 35-minute body of our episode 10. So I apologize for our Thursday release coming out on. I was so exhausted from. I encourage you to watch it because I've seen it a lot. I've seen that episode a lot, but it was either late Saturday or early Sunday that we got it out, and we appreciate that you follow or that you watch. And we also, if you're waiting on Thursdays for our release, we're trying like as much from comedians and like for me to say this, like to try and hit a schedule of where we're releasing this at the same time every week. I'm taking pride in it, so maybe that's why I'm over explaining my apology. But we're gonna try and do it at that time. And if you're like sitting there at 6 o'clock on Thursdays waiting for the mental cruise for Jim and Craig to be coming at you, we're trying. We're pushing all the buttons we can to have that happen. So we hope to see you this coming Thursday for episode 12. And great to see you again, Jim. And
yeah, nice one. Thanks for watching. Cheers.